Blaney.
The famous Russian novelist Dostoevsky once wrote, "If you wish to glimpse inside the human soul and get to know a man, don't bother analyzing his ways of being silent, of weeping, of seeing how much he is moved by noble ideas. You will get much better results if you just watch him laugh. If he laughs well, he's a good man." Poiesis takes its subject from this: humor, comedy, the things that make us laugh. These things tend to be tremendously misunderstood as less than what they truly are. For it is in what we laugh at that we might be revealed for what kind of a person we are, whether we are wise and intelligent, or on the other hand, hateful or ignorant. Over the past several months, I've attempted to conduct an analysis over the different forms of humor and demonstrate that there are certain forms of it that cultivate true wisdom. Now, as much as tragedy is a significant part of the human experience, so is comedy. From antiquity, we see examples such as the Grecian philosopher Plato writing on the virtues of humor as a tool to be used against evil. We see the Roman satirist Horace using humor as a means to critique social vices. We have the Italian poet Dante writing his Divine Comedy, a comedy in the sense that it has a happy ending, one laughable in the sense of joy. We have Shakespeare, Jane Austen, C.S. Lewis, G.K. Chesterton, all great advocates of or users themselves of humor in their writing. Now, this historical context of Western civilization has given me inspiration to use comedy as a subject for my Poiesis, attempting to dissect it and find if somewhere in the mess, true wisdom can be found. Now, the first step I took in attempting to address my topic is in defining my terms. What are the different things that make us laugh? What is humor itself? I was able to do this using 4 different categories that C.S. Lewis offers in his apologetic narrative, The Screwtape Letters, from which I take and adapt different definitions for humor. These 4 categories that Lewis offers are joy, fun, jokes, and satire. Now, the former two, joy and fun, are forms uncontroversial in nature. It is not so much in question as to whether or not they are beneficial, as the first one is necessarily of God, and the second one is inherently innocent by nature. Now, the latter 2 forms, jokes and satire, are what I understand to be forms controversial. It is more in question as to whether or not they are beneficial, as their function relies on subverting our expectations, and as such are more open to being perverted. Now, my thesis in focusing in jokes and satire proposed the argument that jokes and satire ought to be consumed by communities because they cultivate logical minds and wise ones. Now, jokes do this in the sense that their very function, as I've said, relies on subverting our expectations. Now, of course, the necessary requisite to this is having expectations, and we do this through logical deduction and induction. Now, because induction and deduction is a necessary, inherent part to joking, and joking, in theory, should be funny, we are given a sort of incentive to be logical thinkers ourselves. As such, it can be demonstrated that jokes, by necessity, cultivate logical minds. Now, satire does this in a similar way, in that the goal of the satirist is to mend a social vice by critiquing using an ironic message. Now, he'll do this in a way by attempting to demonstrate the social vice himself through his actions, therefore showing that it should be avoided. Now, this is an ironic message in that the satirist is expressing a message that is the opposite of the literal interpretation of his actions or words, and as such, our expectations are subverted, and the satirical experience itself becomes funny. Now, again, we are given this incentive of funniness itself, which is a pleasurable experience to engage in satire, to learn from the satirist, and to learn how to mend our own social vices. As such, it can be demonstrated that satire inherently cultivates wisdom. Now, this being the case, that jokes cultivate logical minds, and that satire cultivates wisdom, I would urge each of you to be consumers of them within your own communities. Watch satirists like Stephen Colbert, indulge in his wit, learn from his hidden message. Enjoy, as I do, the ever-clever knock-knock joke. Satirize an angry or flustered politician, or be a furious advocate of something you don't understand at all. These are all examples of jokes and satire that you might engage in within your own communities and with your own friends, and hopefully will result in the common enjoyment of logic and wisdom. I'll conclude in agreement with Shakespeare, who writes in The Merchant of Venice, "With mirth and laughter, let old wrinkles come." Thank you. And are there any questions? Yes, Mr. Sachs.
Mr. Blaney, how would you define in those four terms, joy, fun, jokes, satire, a pun?
A pun falls into the category of the joke because it is not aiming to critique a social bias as satire is. However, it still relies on subverting our expectations. So if we have a word, we expect a meaning from it, and then the person punning will use a different interpretation of that word in order to get across some sort of humorous message, or simply to make us flip our expectations and laugh. Mr. Lynch.
Michael, do you know Sir Philip Sidney said there are certain things we shouldn't laugh at? What kinds of things, would you agree with that? And if so, what kinds of things do we find ourselves not, do we refuse to laugh at?
Yes. I agree that there are certain things which we should not laugh at. And these things generally take the form of things that include tangible suffering. And this is sort of an ambiguous term, but anything that creates any sort of actual suffering of an individual is something that shouldn't be laughed at or ridiculed. There are certain subjects that should be stayed away from in comedy, and the ones that actually produce some sort of tangible sense of sadness are ones that shouldn't be joked about. Mr. Smith.
I'm just wondering, following up on that, are you familiar, if you're familiar with Jonathan Swift's famous Modest Proposal, right, where he says the answer to the Irish famine is for them all to eat their children. And he's making a very serious satirical point, but it seems like he's, so would you say that's between jokes and satire? As long as you're satirizing it, you're wanting to correct the social ill, you're not truly deriving some laughter. And is that different from just joking about the ill, the social ill?
Yes, I think satire is also an effective means of communication, as he has done there with satirizing the situation of the Irish famine. It's an effective means of communication that is not necessarily funny in nature. It is frequently used in that way in that it's an ironic message, but irony is not always funny. However, satire for the purpose of my thesis here is usually with the intent to be funny. But yes, there are certain forms of satire which are ironic in nature but not necessarily funny, but are still an effective means of communication. Hannah.
What would you say about a self-deprecating sense of humor? What category would that fall in? Is it necessarily something we should find humorous?
Yes, that would fall into the category of jokes, again, because people don't necessarily expect you to make fun of yourself and to bring yourself down. But in doing this, you express a sort of humility about yourself, which in a way reversely brings yourself back up. You are showing yourself that you are not an ideal human being, but that you recognize these flaws and that you hope to mend yourself. Yes?
What do you think about drawing the line in terms of taste, the jokes that are towards taste?
Could you repeat that? I'm sorry.
So what do you think about drawing the line in terms of jokes that are in poor taste, like making jokes about something where everyone just kind of says, ew, you shouldn't do that?
Yeah, there are objective instances in which you shouldn't joke. As I responded to Mr. Lynch, I believe that there are certain cases, such as with tangible suffering, that you shouldn't joke about. In cases where it's not entirely objective, that the subject of the joke should not be joked about, you should just know your audience. So know who you're communicating to, know the community you're talking to, and hopefully don't offend anyone. Are there any more questions? All right.